All right, let's take you to some background of this particular matter now. So the Social Relief of Distress grant facing that major legal showdown at the Supreme Court of Appeal. It follows that landmark High Court ruling that we saw in January 2025. And of course, that was quite, the big judgment there, especially given the reaction of some of those groups that took this matter to court. So at stake, you're thinking about the 18.3 million potential beneficiaries that have been identified. These are said to be individuals who are eligible to qualify for this particular grant. But when you look at Treasury currently approving the budget to fund around 10.5 million, that would of course lead to a number of discrepancies as far as this particular number is concerned. Because how then do you begin to bridge the gap to get from here to there? So that's where now there is, of course, that issue. So the bone of contention here is also around the fact that when you look at the High Court in and itself, did it err? It's some of what is being asked. Did it err in its findings that the SRD grant was not a temporary measure, but a permanent feature? So then you look at, of course, the online-only rule. And this is what, SASSA and the Department of Social Development arguing against, right? To say that when you think about some of what the High Court said when it comes to the ruling, it ruled against key administration policies that were declaring the online-only application process unconstitutional, and also calling bank verification checks unlawful. And this speaks to what both the organizations, particularly SASSA, is saying that if you were to have people in person to come and actually do this, it may lead to the paralysis of the administration processes. But also then you think about those who are saying that some of the checks that are being used here are in fact flawed and unlawful, because you've seen some of the beneficiaries who are raising a concern even about this very issue, to say that some of what is being done as the checks is not actually working. Then you move on to, of course, what the judges had to say around the 624 Rand income threshold. They say that it sits well below the poverty line, and this includes that the SRD grant for them is no longer a temporary measure but a necessity, which they say is quite important. So how then do you begin to also ensure that this particular number is increased against the backdrop of an economy that is also not growing, with Treasury also raising its own concerns as far as this matter is concerned? So currently, this is where this particular grant stands in terms of money. 370 Rand is the current offering that you get as a payout, and the 855 Rand that is required as far as the food poverty line. Can you imagine when someone has to meet their basic necessities, it's around this much that is needed to try and then be able to meet some of your basic food needs. So think about the gap between here and there. That is also another issue that advocacy groups are actually calling on, to say that for them, they want this grant to be kept within inflation pace, because they say that it is important that if this is done, this particular grant would be sitting at around 470 Rand today. And then we just bring you some final just look at this. You think about 18 million applications that would have been received by SASSA, right? And that speaks to the number of people, the desperation as far as this is concerned. So this number, quite a huge number, especially when you think about the people and the difference that this money makes in their lives. So 7.8 million applications then being approved, around 10 million plus applications rejected, also raising a concern on its own. So the approval rate around 43.5%. That also, of course, making a number of applicants unhappy, because it leaves millions of households without basic financial support. And as a reminder, you'd remember that government introduced this particular grant in May 2020 to try and deal with some of what the country was facing at the time, and that was around the COVID-19, and to be able to assist a number of individuals who would not be working but also would need to be assisted with some basic necessities. So this is but some of the arguments that are being raised as this matter is coming into sharp focus at the Supreme Court of Appeal. We'll continue then to bring you more installments on this particular matter.